Hello everyone, I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. In the first part of our interview with District Attorney Johnson Britt, he went into the details of how Michael Jordan's father was killed near Lumberton 25 years ago. He talked about the investigators gathering evidence against the two suspects, Daniel Green and Larry Demery. How he kept in touch with the Jordan family during the national media attention that followed. And finally, how Larry Demery agreed to a plea deal and then agreed to testify against Daniel Green. Well, as we start part two of our interview, Johnson Britt goes more into his preparation for the actual trial against Daniel Green, how it all played out in court, the strength of Larry Demery's testimony against Green in getting the conviction, and Green's continued legal attempts, even to this day, to win himself a new trial. And as you go through this trial, was there any point that you didn't think that you had Green convicted, or anything happened during the trial, or was this pretty much textbook?
No, it was building. It became, in the scheme of things, it became an easy case to try because there had been so much prep put into it, and the way you could just put it in segments, and each segment built upon the previous, and so it culminated with Larry Demery. And Larry Demery was on the stand for almost a week between his direct, his cross, redirect, recross. And he was raked over the coals by the defense attorneys, trying to get him to break from, and his story never changed.
Right.
From the moment that he confessed at the sheriff's department throughout the remainder of the trial, he never wavered on what he had said happened. And so it culminates with that, and then it goes to the jury. The jury comes back, finds him guilty of felony murder, finds him guilty of conspiracy to commit armed robbery. We weren't trying the other robberies. We used those, and I used those in the course of the presentation to show, one, the identity of who the shooter was, two, this course of conduct they were on, because it progressively got more violent. And it ended with Mr. Jordan. So then it goes to sentencing. The jury comes back life. So he got sentenced to life for the murder and the merged robbery, and then he got 10 years at the expiration of the life for the conspiracy. So he still has 2 remaining armed robbery charges and a felonious assault charge pending against him, plus the conspiracies. And so he's sentenced. A month later, we're back in court, and I'm picking a jury for Larry Demery's sentencing hearing. And we go through that, and basically it's a representation of much of the case. And then it goes to the jury. That jury comes back life for Larry Demery. Afterwards, we're told that they gave him life because Daniel Green had gotten life. If Daniel Green had gotten death, they'd have sentenced Larry Demery to death. That's, and the luck of the draw, I guess, for them.
What do you think kept the jury from giving Green the death penalty?
I don't know. They had invested a lot in mitigation. They had a psychologist, sociologist come down and kind of map out Daniel Green's life. What people forget is Daniel Green had just gotten out of prison for a horrible assault that he committed on another teenager. In fact, it was a prearranged fight. Number of people showed up to watch it. Daniel Green's there. The young man that he's going to fight is there. And unbeknownst to everybody, Daniel Green has an axe stuffed down, the leg of his pants. And as they get ready to square off the fight, he whips this axe out and he hits this kid in the head. Not with the blunt end, but with the sharp end.
Wow.
And the kid was lucky to survive. He now has the mind of like a 10-year-old. And he ends up, they were juveniles. The case was transferred to Superior Court. for trial as an adult, and he eventually pled guilty to that. Was sentenced, went to prison, got out of prison, and then in the course of the Jordan proceedings, there's a motion filed to set aside that conviction, based on the fact that his lawyer, who was a member of the public defender's office, did not advise him that she was going to leave that office to take a job as an ADA in Durham. And basically they said that he was threatened with the prospect of he could plead guilty in front of Judge A, or they'd go try him in front of Judge B, who was Joe Freeman Britt, whose reputation was he was a hanging judge.
Yeah.
And so he ended up pleading.
Right.
But that was set aside, which was a factor in aggravation that was taken away.
Did you ever sit across the table from either one of these two young men and
Yes.
have conversations with them?
Yes. In preparing for the trial, any good lawyer is going to talk to their witnesses before they put them on the stand, because you want to know what they're going to say. You don't want to be surprised by something.
Sure.
So yes,
Don't ask a question you don't know the answer to.
that's true.
Right.
And so there were meetings where Mr. Hefney from the SBI, Mr. Thompson from the Sheriff's Department, and I would meet with Larry Demery and his lawyers. Nothing was done without his lawyers there.
Right.
And initially, we would meet late afternoon. He'd be brought over from jail. We'd meet in my office. Mr. Thompson could take him back to the jail. And so part of it was just to develop a rapport with him, which was which was difficult. Not kind of, it was difficult. Larry was very withdrawn. That's the type of personality he is. And so it was, at first it was like trying to dig information out of him. It's like, tell me what happened after this, and just trying to get it chronologically. And I could tell that he was somewhat reluctant to testify against his friend. And so eventually we developed a rapport, and his lawyers played their role as defense attorneys, and they would cross-examine him. I wouldn't. And they were equally as tough on him as Green's lawyers were when we actually got to court. And so then it became not only get him to talk about it, but to understand the environment in which he was going to be placed in, and that was take him into a courtroom.
And Green, ever sit across the table from him?
No. He Green denied everything, and
still does to this day, right?
Yeah, kidding. There was an interview with Channel 5 on Monday or Tuesday, with a new version of how things happened. Yeah, but no, Green tried to speak to me in the back hallway on a break, and I was like, and I just put my hand up. I was like, you can't talk to me. And so we got back into court. I reported to the bench. I just want the record to show that Mr. Green spoke to me in the back hallway. I really don't know what it was about, but I made no attempt to follow up with him. His lawyers weren't there. And then they put it on record, he didn't want to talk to me about this case. He wanted to talk about a friend who was in jail and what was going to happen with his case. And I didn't know in the scheme of things, we have 2,000 pending cases at any time. If you ask me about defendant A and it's not one on my plate, I don't know about it.
Sure. So,
but no, he is, he and I have never spoken. He and I will never speak. We have pending litigation right now. They're trying to get, after 25 years, get it set aside. Now they're claiming he's innocent. Initially, it was a motion for a new trial. It's kind of evolved into Chris Muma. I don't know if you're familiar with Ms. Muma.
Yes, the Innocence Commission.
Well, there's a difference between the Innocence Commission and the Innocence Project. She runs an Innocence Project.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Right.
She has made an appearance and now is promoting that Daniel Green is innocent, but they're innocent of murder. They're saying he was an accessory after the fact.
Does that kind of stuff, when they come back afterwards, is that to the prosecutor of the case, irritating, angering, or just part of the job?
It's both part of the job first and foremost, but it's irritating. This is not Daniel Green's first attempts to get a new trial. The first time he filed a pro se motion, a lawyer was appointed to represent him. That lawyer was appointed with the direction from the court to investigate his claims and to review the record and determine if there was a basis for filing a motion for appropriate relief for a new trial. That lawyer filed an affidavit with the court, said that in his professional opinion there were no issues to raise. Any that were appropriate to raise in a motion for appropriate relief had been addressed during the appeal.
Mm-hmm.
A second lawyer was then appointed to again investigate. That lawyer did not file a motion for appropriate relief and eventually withdrew because of communication issues with Daniel Green. And then now Scott Holmes and I can't remember the other guy's last name is Mance. They're out of Durham.
Okay. They
end up appearing and filing a motion, and now Ms. Muma has joined them during the course of this, and that's pending. It was had been assigned to an emergency judge who's a retired Superior Court judge, and we were making progress. The Attorney General's office is handling the case. They've made me a witness in the case by allegations that they made at me, and so the Attorney General's office is handling the case. They were progressing. Then the legislature did away with emergency judge status.
Right.
And so our senior resident judge in our district asked Judge Winston Gilchrist, who is judge out of Harnett County and is assigned to our county for this 6-month term of court, if he would take it. And it's my understanding we haven't had any. There haven't been any hearings. I don't know if there's been any communication between Judge Gilchrist and the attorneys. Mm-hmm. As I said, I'm a witness. But if something's happening in the case, the AG's office lets me know.
What was the biggest piece of evidence aside of Demery? Was there another piece of evidence in that trial that just slam dunked it for you?
The gun being found in his mother's house. Mm-hmm. While the bullet removed from Mr. Jordan was never positively identified as being fired from that gun. There's similarities, but there's insufficient microscopic detail to say it was a match. That, and then after Green was arrested, he asked to speak to the former sheriff.
Hubert Stone, wasn't it?
Hubert Stone was the sheriff.
Yeah.
Sheriff Stone contacted SBI agent Tony Underwood, who was stationed in Lumberton, and asked him to come to the office that he needed to talk to him. And when Tony Underwood gets there, Daniel Green's sitting in the office, and Daniel Green has talked with Hubert Stone, and so Sheriff Stone looks at Daniel Green and says, "Tell him what you just told me." And basically says, "I can take you to where one of the rings is." And he had gone, so Tony Underwood takes him. They go to his grandmother's house in Rolla, North Carolina. And he said, what are we looking for? He said, "I can take you to the NBA All-Star ring. I buried it." "Well, where'd you bury it?" "In my grandmother's backyard." Well, they get there, like, where? He said, "It's over there." So Agent Underwood is trying to locate what he's talking about is the location for this ring. Mm-hmm. And he's digging, not finding anything. Yeah. And Daniel Green's like, go a little deeper. And as he does, he unearths the ring. It ended up being a combination of it. It was a combination of everything. It was a very, very strong circumstantial evidence case against Daniel Green without Larry Demery. With Larry Demery, it became an incredibly strong case. I mean, one of the things that was happening that it was I guess what happens it was my first case where a lot of media attention
that was going to be my next question.
That there's a lot of things said on the steps of the courthouse that are never said in the courthouse.
Right.
And so it became a situation where I gave the media a lot of access before trial, but I decided that during the trial, I wasn't going to say anything, just out of fear that I violated some ethics rule. But it became apparent that each day there was a press conference that was taking place on the steps of the courthouse, and that it was the defense story that was getting out through the media, and my story really wasn't what we were saying. It became apparent that I had to address that, so I would go out and speak to the media. And at some point, they really stopped covering it, because as it unfolded, it went from, oh, they don't have anything on these guys, oh, wow, they really do. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was a guy by the name of Scott Rabb. He wrote a scathing article during the pendency, shortly after the after they were arrested, a scathing article about Sheriff Stone and about Robeson County, and about that, it's culturally very diverse, it's very segregated, it's crime-ridden, that Larry Demery and Daniel Green were just scapegoats, and he had access to Daniel Green. In fact, Scott Rabb sat through the entire trial, and he had spoken with me a little pre-trial, but I was hesitant to talk to him because I knew what angle he was taking. But as the trial went on, he eventually changed his whole tune about his aspects of his view of the case. And in fact, we learned some information during the middle of the trial, and Mr. Hefney and Mr. Thompson, I dispatched them to somewhere in South Carolina because of a potential witness. And they get there, and the investigator for the Daniel Green's defense team and Mr. Rabb are there.
Wow.
Interviewing these people. And so Mr. Thompson and Mr. Hefney show up, and they're like, how'd y'all find out about him? Why are y'all here? It's like, we got a duty to follow up on this. We got this name, and so we're here to find out what this story's about. And Rabb was like, I've never heard of, a prosecutor or an attorney who, during the midst of a trial, is sending his people out to follow up on what could be favorable evidence for the defendant. And so eventually he approached me one afternoon or one evening as I'm leaving the courthouse. He said, can I just ask you a question?
On the record or off the record?
I was just talking to him, and
yeah.
he said, I want to ask you something. Why is it that we'll have these mini press conferences on the front steps of the courthouse, and the defense is saying, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen, this is what they're going to do, and you'll give us bits and pieces of what to expect, and everything you tell us pans out in court, and then theirs doesn't? I said, because you've got to understand, my audience is not the people in the public. My audience is the 12 people that are sitting in that jury box. That's who I'm focused on. I don't really pay attention to
the court of public opinion, anyway.
Yeah,
right?
but I'll be honest with you. I got every video recording that was ever made by or a news agency. Mm-hmm. I'd go. We were in the midst of renovating our house. We had this addition built on the back of our house, and so we were putting hardwood floors in another room. So all of our furniture was in one room. We had access to that, our den, our kitchen, and that was it downstairs.
Right.
And so every evening I go in, my kids would be lined up on the sofa, my wife would be there, and they'd be waiting for me to come in, and they'd plug in the tape and hit the record button as we watched the news together. But
with all that media attention and it being, I guess you're a couple of years, or maybe about a year and a half into your DA, as an official DA at this point in time. You couldn't have come under a tougher baptism of fire than you did with that trial.
And that's true. It was the biggest thing going in the country at the time. I'd been an assistant DA there. I'd tried a lot of cases. I'd spent very little time in district court. I was always a superior court prosecutor. I graduated from law school in 1987. and started in the DA's office in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
And then lost my job in Lumberton over a rumor that I was running for DA. And I was out of work for about 2 months. I started a little private practice. I got lucky. I got a job with Rex Gore in the 13th District, which was Brunswick, Bladen, and Columbus.
Yeah.
And my job was to run Superior Court in Bladen and Columbus counties. And so I got an opportunity to get a lot more trial experience. I also got a lot more experience and freedom to prosecute as I saw fit. In Lumberton as an ADA, it was a situation where we didn't negotiate pleas. People either pled straight up or you tried them. It wasn't unusual to go to court and try 5 cases in a row with juries out in multiple courtrooms. It was just that kind of grind. But the experience I had working for Rex Gore gave me an opportunity to really develop as a prosecutor.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I took office in Lumberton, I was coming with this additional experience. I was fully aware of what I was walking into. When I announced that I was running, Larry Demery and Daniel Green were already in custody.
Mm-hmm.
I announced in November of '93 that I was running, and then it became very apparent that it was going to be my case to try.
Had you followed the goings-on just like everybody else had?
Sure. I was interested. It happened in my hometown, my home county.
Yeah.
It was in the courthouse where I had worked, and I knew that if I won, it was going to be the case that I was going to get to try. And I mean, and the truth be told, it's the biggest case I've ever tried. And I've tried a lot of cases,
Mm-hmm.
cases that have received a lot of media attention. Nothing on this scale, but it was the biggest case in my career.
Were there any media outlets that were just a pain to deal with, or were most of those? I know, Mitch Davis covered it for the local news here, and we had a reporter that would go up there as well. But the local reporters are one thing. It's when you get the national media to come in is a different story.
Well, the national media was really going through the affiliates. The one national person that actually came to Lumberton was Drew Levinson. I don't know if you know Drew.
Yes, I remember the name.
He
sure.
was with NBC at the time, and he may still be with CBS. Drew grew up in Fairmont. Drew and I knew each other.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
We went to basketball camp at UNCP together, played pickup basketball again. So we knew each other. And so he's there, and he was there for one day, and he and I spoke, and then Jim Crisula, who was with CBS Radio out of Greensboro, developed a good rapport with him. Estes Thompson, who was a reporter with the AP out of Raleigh. Channel 5, Mark Roberts came. I'm trying to think. Greg Barnes, Channel 11. And then Channel 13 out of Florence, Channel 15 out of Florence. They were the primary coverage people. So there were people I already knew.
Mm-hmm.
I knew Greg, having grown up in Lumberton. His sister's my age. I just knew him as her big brother.
Yeah.
He was the radio guy. He was a DJ. But
what kind of impact did it take on your family?
They understood. My youngest son was 3, turning 4.
Okay, so maybe a little young for that.
He was 4 after he turned 4 after Green was completed in March. My oldest was born in '87, so he was 6 years old. He's the one, if you go back and look in archives of photographs after the trial, I'm outside the courthouse talking to my wife and son. My son's got a Chicago Bulls hat on. My oldest son was much more aware of what I was doing than I think my daughter and certainly my youngest son.
Sure.
But it was a situation where my day went like this. I'd get up 6 o'clock in the morning, get ready to go to work, see them before they got off to daycare or school, and then I'd go to work, and I would try this case. I would come home as quickly as I could after we had recessed. We would have dinner together. I would be there until it was time for them to go to bed. 8, 9 o'clock, I'd go back to the courthouse.
Really?
There were many nights that I was at the courthouse till 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning, just prepping, just going over what I was going to do.
With your team?
No, just me.
Just you?
Just me.
Wow.
And I'm not a lawyer who, I can take a report. I don't make a written outline of what I'm going to do. I don't have questions written out. My goal in every case I try, if you're my witness, that I've developed a rapport with you, and when we go into court, we're having a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know the inside and out of my case. And so I've got the report there with me. If you see me taking notes, it's really during cross-examination so that I can come back on redirect and address a point. But that's just the way I operate. So the night crew at the courthouse, their shift starts at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They go home at midnight. There were many nights they would come in and tell me, good night, we're leaving, and I would be up there. Robeson County Courthouse probably has ghosts.
Yeah.
Because there were times I would be in my office, and it's configured differently now than it is, but I would have my desk positioned so I could almost see out the front door as people were coming in, and it's glass. And the lights would be off in the hallway, the lights would be off in the outer office, and and all of a sudden a light would come on from the hallway, and it was the elevator opening, and I'm like, okay, it's time for me to go home.
Yeah, time for me to get out of here.
But I mean, I was running on adrenaline.
Yeah.
For the longest time. But they understood. My wife understood.
Sure.
They understood the stress I was under, and couldn't have been more supportive.
The day after, because I guess in the whole process of this, I know there was appeals, but the day after Demery's sentencing, then I guess was the last of the first round of everything.
Yes.
Did you take a deep breath that next day? Did you decompress that next day? Did you not go to work?
No, I was elated by the success that when I say we, the team had, because they did the work. My job was just to present it, and to be the voice for everybody in this case. And so, yeah, I was extremely elated. Went home. I don't remember what we did. I don't know if knowing us, we probably ordered pizza.
Right.
As a celebration.
Yeah.
And then, I came to work next day. I am not one, have never been one to not work, other than when I've been sick. That case was over. It was now time to get everything boxed up so that we could have a record of it, and then get ready for whatever was next.
And is that the attorney in you, or is that the man who wants the victim in the next case to think, I'm going to give just as much to that victim as I did to NBA, North Carolina, high-profile guy Michael Jordan's family?
It's a little bit of both. I'm a third-generation lawyer.
Right.
And my dad and granddad were both criminal defense attorneys. That's what I always thought I wanted to do. That's what I intended to do when I went to law school. That's what I intended to do when I got out of law school. I thought the DA was the bad guy. That was my vision. Of course, Joe Freeman Britt was the DA in Robeson County.
Yeah, and he was your cousin of yours, right?
We are related, yes.
Yeah.
So, in 1989, in 1988, I'm practicing law, and Eddie Hatcher.
Yep, I remember. Place.
We stood on the top of the office building that I worked in Lumberton, and watched the police scurrying through the alley beneath us because the newspaper.
He had taken everybody inside the Robesonian newspaper hostage.
And there were helicopters, and you're like, wow, what in the world? And that was really, while I'd grown up there, I'd been away. I went to college in 1978. I got married in 1982. I ended up going to law school. So it was about a 10-year period where my dad had died right before I went to college. My mother moved away, and so I didn't have a lot of contact with what was going on in Lumberton. I just knew that when I went to law school, I was going back to Lumberton and do what I always dreamed of doing. And that was to practice law. My first training was practice law with my dad, but he died unexpectedly. He was 46. My granddad died while I was in college.
Wow.
And so, but I was determined I was going back to Lumberton as a lawyer. And so I get back, and I'd lived in Winston-Salem. I'd lived in Benson while I was in law school. My wife worked in Raleigh, and pick up the internet. You'd read stories about what was going on, allegations that were being made. And so you come back with somewhat of a jaded eye to what's being reported. Now, is this really the town I grew up in? Is this really the community? And Eddie Hatcher was the opening sonnet to, or it may have been the final sonnet, but it brought all the criticism to a head.
Yeah.
And it suddenly became a little local issue with some state coverage. Suddenly it was a big state issue and a big national issue.
Yeah.
And changes occurred as a result of that.
Yeah, I've read one comment of yours that said Eddie Hatcher was right. He just went about it the wrong way.
Yes, and I believe that there was corruption within the Robeson County Sheriff's Department at some level. Did it reach all the way to Sheriff Stone? I don't know. But in looking back at history and then having gone through what we did in the tarnished badge investigation that brought down
Glenn Maynard's
regime, you can see how easily it could occur. And so, yeah, Eddie Hatcher was owned to something. He just didn't go through the right channels.
Yeah.
And so with the changes that occurred, Joe Freeman Britt became a Superior Court judge. The man he was running against was killed during the midst of that election. And then the legislature creates a second Superior Court judgeship, which is designated as a minority seat. And then when Joe Freeman Britt becomes the judge, Richard Townsend becomes the DA. And there are openings. There were people who left the office. And so Richard Townsend approached me. There was a public defender's office that was being opened. Angus Thompson, who was the first public defender in Robeson County, who represented Daniel Green, he approached me about coming to work.
Yeah.
And I waited. I knew I wanted to do trial work. In the end, it was what was the best way for me to get into court and develop experience trying cases. My idea was I'd go to work for the DA's office, stay for 5 years. I'd go open a law firm and I'd practice, make a name for myself. But in the midst of all that, my oldest son at the age of 3 was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Right.
So I had to have insurance.
Yeah.
I could not go on have him go on Cobra a year later. And so it became a big issue. And so I liked what I was doing. In the end, I think I was pretty good at what I was doing.
I think you've held the office for almost quarter century.
And so
can I, the attorneys for Demery and the attorneys for Green, after this all ended, I know Green has continued to appeal. Conversations with them over a beer somewhere about the inner workings or what happened do attorneys share that kind of thing?
We talk. I mean, we're all friends. I mean, first and foremost, while we're adversaries in court, we're all friends outside of court. I mean, we all know each other. It's a small bar in the scheme of things. I dare say, without really knowing, my guess is New Hanover, Wilmington have in excess of 200 lawyers. Robeson County at the time, we might have had 50. So you know everybody.
Right.
And you work with everybody every day on other cases. Was it contentious? Yes. Was it contentious to the point that it severed relationships? No.
Okay.
But, one of the things that, my dad helped Angus Thompson get into law school. The John Wishart Campbell, who was representing Larry Demery, Angus Thompson clerked for him when he was in law school.
Yeah.
So they're connections.
Everybody knows everybody.
But in the aftermath, what I recall was, in talking with Angus, was they knew they were in trouble when I struck the deal with Demery. I mean, it's an incredible case to have prosecuted. It's an incredible case to have to defended. They were obviously relieved that their client didn't get the death penalty. They were not happy that he got convicted, but they knew what the evidence was, and they knew what could eventually happen. He did not testify, which was his right. And part of that was he was going to be fair game on cross-examination because of all the prior inconsistent statements.
You could have taken him apart.
And, even today when he's professing his innocence, he keeps changing his story. And, after 25 years of being locked up for this, he still can't address what the truth is. Mm-hmm. He says he didn't shoot him. Larry Demery doesn't say that he shot him. Green wanted to point the finger at Demery. Demery points the finger at Green. In the end, they're both there. They're both involved in this. They are both culpable for what happened to Mr. Jordan. Do either one of them ever get out of prison? What people forget is Daniel Green then came back into court months later and pled guilty to the other armed robbery charges, which are linked to this case. And he has an additional 28 years that runs at the expiration of his life plus 10. So he's got 38 years on top of a life sentence. To my knowledge, he's never become eligible for parole. Larry Demery has.
Do you think Demery will get out?
I think eventually Larry Demery will get out of prison. If you go on the North Carolina Department of Corrections website and you look them up, Larry Demery, for the most part, considering the fact he's been in prison. Well, he's been in DOC custody since 1996. He's only had like 11 infractions. That says something to me about the type of person he has become while he's been locked up. I know that his mother comes to see me periodically.
Really?
Yes. His mother and one of the ladies who works as a victim assistant in my office go to church together. But Mrs. Demery has been to see me from time to time. When either she's just been in the courthouse and wanted to say hello, she's come by and she's asked me to help Larry in his efforts to get out of prison. To my knowledge, he has come up for parole twice, maybe 3 times. He's been denied. I don't reply to the mm-hmm. parole commission when they send me the notice. But of the two, Larry Demery will get out of prison before Daniel Green.
Have you ever heard from Michael since the trial ended?
No, I've talked to his lawyer. I talked to Mr. Brandt shortly after the verdict came back on Daniel Green. As this has evolved with Daniel Green making these new motions, I have attempted to contact Michael Green via Michael Jordan through the Bobcats and the Hornets. Mm-hmm. Have written him, notifying him of proceedings. Never had a response. I think the last public statement that he made about either case was they were going to let the justice system handle it. The justice system had done so. They were satisfied with it.
I could talk to you about a whole lot of other issues here, but I do want to ask you, and in this most recent one you tried, it was a police officer who was shot and killed.
Yes.
You went for first-degree murder of the suspect. The jury convicted on second-degree murder. In the middle of this trial, not in the middle, toward the end of this, you were reading a victim's impact statement.
Yes. And
you broke down.
Yes.
In court.
Yes.
First time that's ever happened to you?
Yes.
What happened? What emotions did it bring out in you?
Well, it's the first time I'd been involved in cases where police officers have been shot, never killed.
Okay.
I don't go to scenes. I know, for example, Ben David, mm-hmm. his team will go out. They'll go to scenes. I don't go to scenes, partly because I don't want to make myself a witness in a case because I'm stepping out of my prosecutor mold. And so there was an exception. I went to this thing.
Mm-hmm.
My investigator called me. He said, we've had an officer shot, and it's not good. So I drove from the courthouse to the location. Jeremiah's body had already been transported, but the pictures that we had in court with the pool of blood, his gun there, I mean, I saw those things.
Mm-hmm.
And what people don't understand, Jeremiah Goodson was not originally called to be a police officer. He was a linesman for the city of Lumberton, and then became interested in police work. Kid who had grown up poor, got married early, and he and his wife both have just done phenomenally well. And so he had gone from being a patrol officer, he was our gang officer. And being the gang officer, a lot of people think, oh, he's out there trying to arrest all the bad guys. Well, that was part of it, part of identifying who it is. But a large part of what he did was prevention.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to steer kids away from that life. He would go into the middle school. He'd go into the high school. He had a real presence. Studied very hard to become as knowledgeable as he could about gang activity, gang language, the finger symbols. He could tell you that for every gang that we had in Lumberton, and probably more. But he was just a good guy. And his wife was 9 months pregnant when he was shot and killed, and she was just right up the street. He dropped her off when he saw this guy. He didn't tell her who it was.
Really?
He told her, he said, I've seen somebody, I know there are warrants on him. And it was Jeremiah's case.
Yeah.
And the guy had not shown up for court. And they'd been looking for him. But what they didn't know, he was splitting time between Lumberton and Whiteville. And he just happened upon him. So he calls in and asks for backup. He follows him. And he gets out, and literally within 3 seconds, he's dead. Shot 4 times. Once in the neck, which wasn't fatal. Once in the right chest, which wasn't fatal. Once in the jaw. Grazed his jaw, which wasn't fatal. But he had a near contact wound to his left chest.
Oh, so it put the gun up almost right to the body.
Yes, and shot him. And so it's a different feeling.
So the impact statement hit you differently than any others had?
Yes, and I had the benefit of having that statement for a week. And I'd read it many times. And it never struck me the way it did until I read it in court.
And it was from his daughter, right?
His daughter. She is 6 years old. She's in the 2nd grade in the school where my daughter teaches.
Wow.
She has not been my daughter's student, but I asked her, I said, do you know Journey? And she said, yes, I know Journey, and I know Isaiah. That's the son who was born after Jeremiah was killed. And I said, well, Demetria Goodson brought me a letter today that Journey has written to the defendant. And she wants me to read it at the appropriate time when we get to sentencing. If we get to sentencing, I should say. And there's never a guarantee. But so I started. And I was shocked at the verdict. I asked the people in my office who were sitting behind me in the courtroom when the verdict was announced what my reaction was.
Mm-hmm.
And my victim assistant said, well, the back of your neck turned red and it just went up to the top of your head. And then you slumped.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know about the redness of my neck and my head, but I know I felt my body slump. And I describe it as if you pump up a car tire with as much air as you can get in it, and you take a knife and you stick it in the side, and you pull it out, and that air just comes out of it. And that's the way I felt.
Yeah.
So when I read it, all of the emotion of, it's been 6 years.
Yeah.
came back, and for that little girl to write about her daddy, who really she didn't have an opportunity to know.
Yeah.
As you probably know, it's addressed to Dear Mr. Badman.
Yeah.
My mama says I'm supposed to love everybody. I love my mama. I love my daddy. Why didn't you love my daddy?
Yeah.
When I grow up, I want to be a princess, a teacher, and a police officer like my daddy. I want my daddy to take me on a date to a restaurant. I want my daddy to be there. And she goes on to say, it makes me sad when Charlie's daddy comes for donuts for dads and my dad can't be there. Why didn't you love my daddy?
Yeah.
Mr. Badman, please promise me that you'll be good and love somebody. Signed, Journey. And I openly wept, and I've never done that in court.
Yeah.
Don't know that I will ever do it again, but it was a case, as you said, I've been DA a long time.
Yeah.
I was eligible to retire 3 years ago. I didn't because I wanted to try this case. That's how much it meant to me.
Yeah. I know you're not running for re-election. Are you going to take some time off? Are you going to practice law? Are you going to kind of just go out and fish? What are you going to do for the rest of your life?
I don't fish. I do go to the beach, but people ask me when I go to the beach, you don't fish, you don't play golf. I can't play golf. I've got a bad back now. And they're like, I'll tell you what I do. I do a little bit of yard work. I get my chair, I get my cooler, I get my speaker, got my iPhone, I go over and I plop my butt in the sand and I sit there.
Yeah.
And that's the way I decompose. But I intend to practice law. I explored the opportunity of running for Congress in the 9th Congressional District, which stretches from Bladen County west to
Charlotte,
downtown Charlotte and southeastern Charlotte, and just came to the realization that while it's something I'd like to do, that's got to be done literally years in advance because the costs were just astronomical.
Yeah.
And if they redraw the congressional lines and really bring everything east,
more compact around Lumberton.
It's more I look at it from this perspective. Those of us living in southeastern North Carolina, we don't have the same issues that people in Charlotte have. And it really hit home one day. We were in Charlotte visiting with some friends, and I'd been thinking about running for Congress. And we're leaving Charlotte, driving out Independence Boulevard. Come through downtown, coming on out what it basically is Auto Row.
Yeah.
and I'm like, this is a big city. This is a truly big city. It's got a totally different vibe than even Raleigh. And we're driving into Union County, and it's still, you're in technically the suburbs of Charlotte.
Yeah, metro area, yeah.
And it's not until you get beyond Wingate when suddenly the whole landscape changes. And suddenly it's rolling fields, farmland. There are houses here, there are houses there. You go through Wadesboro, it's no different than any other town in southeastern North Carolina. Economically, it's been hit hard. You drive through Rockingham or around the bypass around Rockingham, and you look over where the quarries are, where they used to dig the clay for bricks, and they're abandoned.
Yeah.
And machinery's out there, and then you drive into Scotland County and around Laurinburg, and then you come into Robinson County and even over into Bladen County. You suddenly realize the wealth that exists in Charlotte but is absent from southeastern North Carolina. And I truly believe southeastern North Carolina is the forgotten part of the state.
Yeah.
With the exception of y'all here in Wilmington. Everywhere else, Wilmington, Fayetteville, the beaches, they're struggling.
Yeah.
We've lost our industries. We've lost, our cash crop and tobacco. How do we, as a group of people, as an economic area or an area of state, how do we get back? Yeah. What do we have to do?
That sounds like a campaign speech.
Well, it is. And so, like I said, you take, for example, when Mike McIntyre ran, New Hanover County, Robinson County, historically have always been the same congressional district. It goes back to when
Right.
Alton Lennon had it, Charlie Rose had it, Mike McIntyre had it, and then suddenly they start dividing it up. And they divided up Robeson County intentionally when Mike was there the last time to move him away from his base. When you take away 30,000 votes from the Lumbee tribe, that hurts anybody.
Yeah.
But again, southeastern, the old 7th Congressional District was basically anchored by Fayetteville to the north, Wilmington to the east, and the areas in between.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get back to that.
Yeah.
We have more in common as a group than the people in Bladen County and Robeson County with people in Mecklenburg County.
I appreciate you driving all the way from Lumberton to talk about the most interesting case that I've, it's been in my television news coverage, and I know you said it's the most interesting case in your career. And we wish you the best as you hopefully take it a little bit easy after almost quarter century in the DA's office.
Well, I'm going to go practice law, and then I'm going to look and see what is out there. Not only have I been approached about Congress, I've been approached about running for Attorney General. People have said, "Oh, you need to run for governor." I'm like, let's back off. I'm that, but I want to serve.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in my DNA. Yeah. My parents were both public service. My mother was a teacher. She was on the school board in Lumberton. My dad was in North Carolina Senate. He was a lawyer. And they're my role models in what I've done, and so I want to continue that legacy. And I mean, our state, our country, we need to get back on the right path.
Thank you, sir, for coming down today, Johnson. Good to see you again, man. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks to Johnson Britt for coming in and sitting down for an extended interview on what was a national news story: the killing of Michael Jordan's father, James, and the trials of the two men charged in the murder. Johnson Britt's current term as district attorney will be his last. It ends later this year. No telling what he's going to do in service to the public after that. Next week, we're talking sports with one of the legends in basketball in the state of North Carolina, Eddie Biedenbach. He was a star player at NC State, was an assistant coach there and at a couple of other stops before he landed at UNC Asheville. He won more games at UNCA than any other coach in the history of the Big South Conference. And then he came to Wilmington in 2013 to be part of the staff at UNCW.
I swear, I never went into a game that I didn't think we could win, as a player or as a coach. I knew there was problems with certain games and certain teams and arenas and officials. I always got to bring up officials.
Eddie, come on.
So, but I was different than say Wooden. He said he never mentioned winning. I did. I wanted to win. I thought that was important. I was more Vince Lombardi, winning second places away down there.
Yeah, second place is just the first loser, as Dale Earnhardt said, right?
Yeah. So, but I wanted to win. I wanted to stay within the rules. I wanted to do what was gave you honesty, integrity, and character, and win.
That's Eddie Biedenbach right here next week on our podcast. If you know someone who you think would be a good interview for an upcoming episode, please send me an email and let me know about it. The email address is jevans@wect.com. And if you leave me a rating or a review for this week's episode, and you send me a screenshot of it by email just to let me know what you had to say, well, you could be the lucky listener we pick at random, and we'll send you that WECT travel mug. I'm John Evans. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of One on One.